The member for Mount Lawley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in the 8 years that I've been in this place, I've never been subjected to an act of political bastardry quite like having to follow the member for Mandurah after he's just delivered his valedictory speech. Madam Speaker, in all seriousness, I rise to make my final contribution in this place and to bring the curtain down on my 8-year parliamentary career. And I choose the analogy advisedly, seeing as how I'm making my speech immediately following the Minister for Culture and the Arts, Parliament's Belvedere, the minstrel from Mandurah. Can I start by thanking the Minister for his terrific contribution to public life, but more selfishly on behalf of the people of my own community for the support he's provided to the creative arts and cultural industries that are so important to the people of Mount Lawley. The Minister, together with his two Calabrian collaborators, the Treasurer and the Minister for Education, have been crucial in ensuring that the specialist visual arts and performing arts that are such an important part of the fabric of our community will continue to be the centrepiece of a rejuvenated ECU Mount Lawley site, with the transfer of the world-class facilities of the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts to the Mount Lawley Senior High School. The high school, long renowned for its specialist visual and performing arts program, will reach new heights with this incredible development and will build on decades of close collaboration with ECU and the university moves the very short distance into Northbridge. Members, this evening I wanted to talk about three things, three main topics. Three's the magic number of stories. Let's call them advocacy, choice and privilege. Members, while we're in this place, we must do advocacy on behalf of our communities, our constituents. We must do advocacy for those who rely on Labor governments to lift them, drive an economy that creates jobs and manages the finances to pay for excellent schools and world-class healthcare. Choice doesn't just mean the right to choose to die with dignity or the right to access abortion service. We must make the choices that reflect the right priorities for our community. I want to highlight some of the choices that we have made as a government over my 2 terms, from which I derive a great sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. In doing so, I want to acknowledge some of the outstanding members of Cabinet that have served in the WA Labor government and their incredible advocacy. From our first term of government, I want to acknowledge Alana McTiernan and Ben Wyatt. These two were two of the first people I knew in the Labor Party, and they were both so excited about my candidacy for the 2017 election. They were both such terrific supporters, but also such incredible advocates. Alana, a great advocate on anything she put her mind to, and Ben, an advocate for fixing the state's finances. Never as an end in itself, but as a means to an end, to deploy the resources of government to allow people to fulfil their potential. One of the projects that Treasurer Wyatt did decide to allocate resources to has become a beacon in our local community, thanks to a significant investment from the state government, together with the generous community contributions and a contribution from the federal government. We now have a wonderful new Jewish community centre, which, as well as accommodating a number of local community groups, also houses a Holocaust Institute. Sadly, in light of recent events, the opening of this new facility is timely, so we can continue to remind the community of the scourge of anti-Semitism. To former Premier Mark McGowan for standing up to the federal government and Clive Palmer to keep our state safe and strong. I was proud to serve as a member of the Parliament during that first term. I was privileged to serve on the Public Accounts Committee, ably chaired by the member for Armidale. I was privileged to share my membership of that committee with Dean Nelder, Vince Catania and the member for Bicton. Members, every report that committee produced was unanimous. Not only was that a testament to the skills of the chair, but also a testament to the spirit of collaboration and cooperation that infused that committee. I was also privileged to serve on the Joint Select Committee into End-of-Life Choices, ably chaired by the member for Morley. All 8 members of that committee agreed with most chapters. One member wrote one dissenting chapter. Such a small dissent, but again, a testament to the calibre of the chair. That report, through the advocacy of the chair, the members of the committee, the then Minister for Health, who is now the Premier, the Attorney-General and Premier McGowan, went on to form the basis of legislation that would give Western Australians the choice to die with dignity. I also want to acknowledge some of the other reforms shepherded through this Parliament by the Attorney-General. He didn't dwell on some of his incredible signature achievements, but there were 2 that I really wanted to spend time focusing on. In our first term, the lifting of the statute of limitations that had previously barred victims of historical child sex abuse, and in our second term, improving compensation for victims of asbestos-related diseases. It's salient to reflect on my maiden speech and the fact that I raised both of these issues in my maiden speech, and to know that through the advocacy of the Attorney-General we were able to legislate both of those matters. I want to acknowledge the member for Cannington, who was the then Minister for Industrial Relations, asked me to represent the interests of the community on the Ministerial Advisory Panel into Work, Health and Safety Laws. That panel and the recommendations were instrumental in modernising and harmonising our work, health and safety laws. I want to acknowledge, he's just gone. I want to acknowledge our current Premier, Roger Cook, for the work we both did in our first term when I was his Parliamentary Secretary at the start of the second term on medical research. I'll be forever grateful for the opportunity to travel with you to Israel and for the legislation to create the Medical Research Future Fund, a step change in the way medical research is now viewed in WA, elevating it to its proper place. And finally, whilst thanking all of the ministers, I shouldn't single a few out, but I just want to thank one more minister, and that's the Minister for Police. And I'll return to this topic a bit later. But whilst passing on my thanks to ministers, I wanted to acknowledge the amazing support that Minister Papalia has provided to me and my community since the despicable and barbaric terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas in Israel on the October 7th of last year. Minister, your clear, early and decisive expression of support and solidarity was immensely appreciated and sent an unambiguous message to the Jewish people in my community. You've backed that up with repeated expressions of concern and efforts to ensure community safety. So thank you. Members, whilst I've started my contribution focusing on the terrific work of the McGowan and Cook ministers, I wanted to reflect on an essential ingredient that was necessary to deliver government in 2017. None of what I've outlined above could have been achieved had we not been elected to government. None of what we achieved could have been achieved had we not won Balcatta, Belmont, Bicton, Kingsley, Kalamunda, Jandakot, Joondalup, Morley, Perth, Forestfield, Swan Hills, all of these seats that we won in 2017 were material in delivering us success in 2017, material in delivering us government. Our success in 2021, which saw us record the best ever Labor Party vote, was built on the success in 2017. We would never have done so well in 2021 had it not been for the extraordinary efforts of the class of 2017. Every one of our successful candidates in 2017 took a leap of faith, left the stability and security of their employment, put their names forward to represent their local communities. Each member knew the toll it would take on their lives and their families. Each member of that class of 2017 saw off an incumbent Liberal Party member to win an election. So whilst credit must go to our Cabinet and our ministers for the incredible work they did during that first term of government, we must always remember that we would not have been in government had we not won those crucial seats in 2017. And although the result of the 2017 election was the most consequential in recent memory, I did just want to reflect on one attribute of the 2021 election. And I do this sitting beside the fantastic member for Collie and the member for Albany. I look around the chamber, we've got the member for Collie, we've got the member for Albany, we've got the member for Kalgoorlie, we've got the member for Geraldton, we've got the member for Warren Blackwood, and we've got the member for Kimberley. Right? 2021, 6 new members in 6 seats, all representing country Western Australia, country and regional Western Australia. In Albany and Geraldton, this was the first time that those districts had returned a female member of Parliament. So two of these women were the very first women to represent their seats, and 6 new women elected to regional WA all at the same time. Now, I just thought that was an astounding achievement for the government in 2021. When I was thinking about this, you know, I'm a bit of a politics history nerd, and I thought the next point that I was going to make was probably salient for those of you who are recontesting, because I've always held the belief that every vote counts. And again, member for Bicton, in Melville in 1989, I saw Barry Hodge the other day at a function. In Melville in 1989, Barry Hodge and Doug Shave were contesting the seat. Both candidates ended up on 8,159 votes, precisely, each. Exactly the same number of votes. So if there's ever a moment when you think, maybe I won't go door knocking or maybe I won't make that call for fundraising, just remember that. Doug Shave ended up winning, well, after preferences were distributed, by 32 votes. So to all of those who are contesting the upcoming election, good luck, you have my best wishes. You don't have my envy, I'm very grateful to be moving on. Yes, member for Swan Hills. Now, I just wanted to spend some time reflecting on the great privilege of being able to serve as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Health, first under Premier Cook and now under Minister Sanderson. And I don't want to take any time self-aggrandising my own achievements. Rather, I wanted to use the limited time I have to commend the incredible stakeholders who work collaboratively and compassionately to help deliver world-class health services in Western Australia. There are some wonderful groups working across diverse fields. To those pursuing greater awareness of and resources for ADHD, to those working thoughtfully and compassionately in advocating for community and mental health services, I acknowledge the Western Australian Association of Mental Health, who are having the second day of their conference today. I want to also acknowledge my great friends at the RACGP and the Western Australian Network of Alcohol and Drug Agencies. In the area of public health, I've been blessed to work with great advocates in food safety and food security, as well as the Australian Council on Smoking and Health and the Cancer Council. Members, our world-class health system is a complex organism made up of many intersecting parts where interdisciplinary teams and close collaboration are vital. All of this needs to be underpinned by cutting-edge in research, the commercialisation of intellectual property, job satisfaction and retention, and then that ecosystem needs to be delivered in a post-COVID environment with capacity and capital and labour market restraints. Whilst it might be tempting in an era of political expediency to reduce this complexity to a simple headline-grabbing soundbite, mature and responsible stewardship of the health portfolio requires a deep intellect, a capacity to weigh competing immediate concerns, and the sort of strategic vision that allows our public servants to plan 10 and 20 years in advance. Western Australia has been incredibly fortunate to have had Roger Cook with his emphasis on fostering research, innovation and collaboration, and Abhijit Sanderson with her emphasis on stakeholder engagement, strategic planning and systemic revitalisation as its two most recent health ministers. And I've been privileged to serve as the Parliamentary Secretary to both of them. I just want to make one further mention of Minister Sanderson, and I spoke earlier about choices. Now, choices. Living in a democracy, we have agency. We all have the chance to make good choices. Sometimes we make poor choices, staying out at a party too long after all your mates are left, having an extra glass of red wine before a particularly contentious question time, or growing a ridiculous beard that bears an uncanny resemblance to Santa Claus in the weeks before Christmas. But we make important choices too, serious choices, choices of consequence, the choice to run for Parliament, the choice to give our neighbours and our communities a choice come election time, and a choice to retire from Parliament. I would like to think that my noble choices I have acted thoughtfully and deliberately. For my poor choices, I'm mostly sorry. I will be keeping the beard. It has been a pleasure to work alongside Minister Sanderson, who understands the importance of choice. Minister Sanderson has been instrumental in providing choices for Western Australians, whether that be the choice to access voluntary assisted dying or the choice to access abortion services. While so much in government is about building infrastructure and providing services, it must also be an intrinsic part of a Labor government that we progress towards a more compassionate society. We can change the way society sees itself and its big philosophical and social challenges. Over the past 30 years, Labor has led change on awareness of mental health, on the scourge of family and domestic violence, on the rights of LGBTI people. The way society views these issues has changed materially. As a result of the work undertaken by Minister Sanderson, we now have a society where access to safe and legal abortion services is assured. We now have a society where somebody struck down with a debilitating terminal condition can choose to end their life with dignity. Delivering services and infrastructure, particularly in the way the McGowan and Cook governments have done, is a testament to a great government. Changing the way we think about ourselves as a community and what it means to be compassionate, that's an incredible achievement. Of course, it doesn't always go our own way, and when it doesn't go our way, that can have a big impact. So I wanted to talk about my own choice, the choice to resign from Parliament. For me, 2023 contained some difficult political choices and some terrible moments. The year started with a sense of optimism. There was to be a referendum on an Aboriginal voice to the federal parliament and much-needed amendments to the outdated Aboriginal Heritage Act. Traditional owners and their representatives with whom I had worked in the Pilbara referred to the old act derisively as the destruction of Aboriginal Heritage Act. With the destruction of Juukan Gorge, the sense was that the community would recognise the need to modernise our Aboriginal cultural heritage regulatory regime. The original Act, the new Act, was duly passed and received royal assent. The backlash, unfortunately, was immediate and widespread, fed and spread by fear and misinformation. Nature hates a vacuum, and perhaps we should have taken more time to explain why the reforms were necessary and appropriate. In any event, the well-organised fear campaign was infecting the prospects of the voice referendum. Political expediency required that the government act to repeal, which it duly did. Sadly, this rearguard action did not have the desired effect, and the voice referendum was defeated in any event. The timing could not have been worse. The defeat of the voice referendum was the 14th of October. The repeal of the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act was the 24th of October. Overshadowing them both was an even more tragic event. If you ever wonder why we need to legislate to protect Aboriginal heritage, to provide hope and pride for our First Nations people, if you ever wonder why we need a voice to Parliament to advocate for representation and structural change to overcome entrenched disadvantage, look no further than the circumstances of the early hours of 12 October 2023 when 16-year-old Cleveland Dodd was found unresponsive inside his cell in the youth wing of a high-security adult prison. He died a week later. The Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody was 4 decades ago. It is desperately sad that we still haven't found the answers to what should be a straightforward issue. Unfortunately for me, these 3 blows to Aboriginal reconciliation, a cause which has been so dear to my heart for so long, all came in quick succession after the devastating events of the 7th of October 2023 in southern Israel. As everyone in this chamber knows, hundreds of Hamas terrorists, inspired by a manifesto that expressly calls for the extermination of Jews and the destruction of the State of Israel, swept through southern Israel, murdering and kidnapping innocent civilians. Over 1,200 people died and some 250 were taken hostage, a war crime. Tragically, Hamas has little or no interest in preserving Palestinian life, and so the inevitable Israeli military response has extracted a tragic toll on innocent civilians, and the war in Gaza has had a massive impact on social cohesion in Australia. We are so proud of our multicultural community here in Western Australia. We need to redouble our efforts to preserve that social cohesion and ensure that WA remains a vibrant multicultural community. Upon reflection, I probably should have taken the month of November off work. I found the combination of all these events so confronting and so overwhelming. I did not take any time off, and so by December, my friends in the legal community, acutely aware of the toll this was taking, took me out for lunch and suggested that 8 years of public service might be enough for me, and the time might be right to consider returning to the profession. That, together with a lunch in the Swan Valley with my dear friend, the member for Swan Hills, decided the matter for me before Christmas 2023. Which brings me to today and my retirement from Parliament. Before I finish, I have a few people to thank. Before I do that, I have one last piece of work that needs to be done, and that is this. Recently, there was a decision of the High Court, and this concerns child sex abuse liability, and this is a problem caused by Bird against DP. The citation is 2024 HCA 41. The inability of survivors of historical child sex abuse in Western Australia to recover proper compensation for the sexual abuse perpetrated upon them was addressed by the WA Labor Government's historic reforms contained within the Civil Liability Legislation Amendment, Child Sex Abuse Actions Bill 2017. The bill was introduced in response to findings made and recommendations put forward by the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, initiated federally by Julia Gillard in 2012. The bill was passed and became the Civil Liability Legislation Amendment, Child Sex Abuse Actions, the Act. As a result of the Act, not only were limitation dates removed for child sex abuse actions, but the Civil Liability Act was amended so as to make sure institutions such as the Church could not hide behind the defence that it did not technically owe a duty of care to victim survivors of child sex abuse, which was known as the Ellis defence. Both of these matters were groundbreaking reform. In short, the reforms worked. Thousands of victim survivors were able to finally get their day in court and achieve proper compensation outcome against those institutions with whom they had contact. As these cases progressed through the court system, it became clear that the most common way for an institution to be held legally responsible for the actions of a representative perpetrator was through an extension of the legal doctrine known as vicarious liability. Put simply, this was a rule of law which was interpreted to mean that institutions were liable for the actions of the perpetrator being the actions of those that they serve, i.e. the Church was liable for the sexual abuse perpetrated by the priest. That all changed on Wednesday the 13th of November 2024 when Bird against DP, that's a pseudonym, 2024 High Court of Australia 41 was decided by the High Court. The Court upheld an appeal brought by Bishop Bird as the office holder of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Ballarat, the diocese, against a decision from the Victorian Court of Appeal. The Victorian Court of Appeal held that the diocese was vicariously liable for sexual assaults committed upon it by one of its priests. The High Court held that vicarious liability is strictly confined to circumstances of employment and did not apply to priests who are not employees of the diocese. To the extent this injustice needed to be addressed, the High Court stated clearly it was an issue for the legislature, not the court. I quote from the decision of the majority of the court. That's Chief Justice Gageler, Justices Gordon, Edelman, Stewart and Beach-Jones, at paragraph 68 of the decision. In Australia, the legislature has sought to address these issues of institutional liability following on from various reports which have expressly called for reform by parliamentary intervention given the confined and uncertain scope of liability for intentional torts under the doctrine of vicarious liability at common law in Australia. The difficulty is that the steps taken by various legislatures have not been consistent, and in some important respects, amendments to civil liability following the recommendations of royal commissions are prescriptive. The decision prospective, I beg your pardon, Hansard. The decision has widespread and negative ramifications for victim survivors of child sex abuse. The decision displaces the ability of victims to sue religious institutions for the actions of priests and other servants of the church who might not be strictly classified as employees. The effect of this decision will mean an innumerable number of child sex abuse survivors will not be able to bring a claim against an institution to recover damages for their trauma as a result of their child sex abuse, regardless of how depraved or sexually violent the abuse was. So, what is required? Urgent and further legislative reform is required to overcome the problem created by Bird against DP, which now frustrates the legislative intentions of the McGowan government when it introduced the bill in 2017 to provide justice to Western Australian victims of child sex abuse. So the solution is to amend the Civil Liability Act to the effect that if perpetrators of sexual abuse commit such acts in the context of them being representatives of their institutions, then the institution is held liable for those acts. So what is required is a proposed amendment to Division 2 of Part 2A of the Civil Liability Act. After 15B, insert a new Section 15AB, liability of institution for child sex abuse by associated persons. I've taken the liberty of drafting an amendment, bearing in mind that I'm not going to be in the Parliament when it comes on for debate. Now, further to that, and this is not something that I'm calling on the Cook government or any government. This is something that I'm saying that the Parliament of Western Australia should consider after the state election. And the reason I say that is because movement is already afoot. A question was asked yesterday in the Victorian Parliament by Rachel Payne, who's a member of the South East Metropolitan Region. My question is to the Attorney General. And she said this: the recent High Court decision of Bird versus DP held that the Roman Catholic Diocese of Ballarat could not be held vicariously liable for known historical child sex abuse because the priest was not an employee. And so I ask, will you actively consider legislative reforms to address this step backwards for survivors of institutional child sex abuse accessing justice? The Attorney General of Victoria responded, I thank Ms Payne for the question. The short and simple answer to your question is yes. The Attorney General of Victoria then goes on to say that this matter has been discussed by the meeting of Attorneys General last Friday in the Eastern States, and that Victoria will be the lead jurisdiction. So, my proposal is that whoever forms government after the 2025 state election, and I'm sure it will be the Labor Party, but prioritises these reforms in order to give effect to the legislative reform that we passed in 2017. Now, before I conclude on that point, it's a shame that the member for Cottesloe is about to give his valedictory, because I want to acknowledge the support that he has provided, making sure that the reports of the parliamentary committee on this matter have been unanimous. So there's one last piece of work. In typical fashion, I'm going to leave it to somebody else to do, so I'm sorry about that, but I just thought I should raise it before I go. Now, here we go. This is going to be great. Thank you to my friends in Parliament. A very wise person once told me that if you want friends in politics, you should get a dog. Well, I got two dogs. I got Jet and LJ. Yes, member for Maylands, they are both rescue dogs. No, member for Forestfield, neither of them are greyhounds. And now I've thrown myself all over the place. Just bear with me for a second.
Don't worry, you've got plenty of time.
Yeah. No, because I don't want to... Yeah, all right, here we go. All right, so having said that... Oh, here we go. This goes beautifully. Having said that, I feel as though I've made some great friends whilst I've been here. In the upper house, I want to acknowledge the indomitable Honourable Kate Doust. While there are some things about which we disagree, there are three areas on which we're an absolute unity ticket. The work that she's done for workers' compensation, the work that she's done for victims of asbestos diseases, and the work that she's done supporting me, supporting our Jewish community has been incredible. There is no doubt in my mind that Kate's decision to recontest her seat in the Legislative Council at the next election has eased my transition out of this place. Knowing that she will remain here as a member has given me great comfort that she'll continue to fight for these important issues. Matt Swinburne, who has known me longer than anybody else in this place except for Tara, who as Parliamentary Secretary shepherded so many important bills through the Legislative Council. Two particularly important bills he carried with diligence and aptitude, the Criminal Law Mentally Impaired Accused Act and the Electoral Amendment Act. From the other place, can I acknowledge the Honourable Darren West, the Honourable Sam Rowe and the Honourable Dan Caddy. Friends in here, Cassie Rowe, Tinley, Pricey, Quirky, David Michael and Lenda, who's not in here. My terrific friend, the member for Swan Hills, with whom I spent 4 years sitting up where Statler and Waldorf are sitting at the moment. The Exit Lounge, a long time before it was the Exit Lounge, when we had so much idealism. Yaz Mubarakai, Yaz and I have set the record for parliamentary offices. No couple have shared a parliamentary office for as long as we have. I don't think I could have survived for the 8 years that I'd survived had I not had the great privilege of sharing an office with you. Can I acknowledge my friends in the union movement? Goes without saying. Mick Buchan, Peter O'Keefe, Commissioner, Deputy President Peter O'Keefe, Ben Harris, Tim Dawson, and all as the Minister for Mandurah, the member for Mandurah, the minstrel for Mandurah said, all unionists in Western Australia. I can't help but wonder where we would have been if we spent more time listening to Mick Buchan. And I can't help but wondering whether, some of the challenges that are facing our housing construction sector, asbestos in the ceiling and lead in the water at the Perth Children's Hospital, sexual harassment in the FIFO industry. Time and time again, it seems that Mick Buchan has been proved right on these issues. I'm incredibly honoured to be able to call him a friend, and I'm incredibly grateful to all of the support that he's provided me through good times and bad as a member of Parliament. Friends in the legal profession, Slater and Gordon, I was at a function last week with members of the legal profession and members of the judiciary. It was amazing as you stood around talking other barristers. There was a former Slater and Gordon medical negligence lawyer, a former Slater and Gordon criminal lawyer, a former Slater and Gordon commercial lawyer, a former Slater and Gordon asbestos lawyer, and a former Slater and Gordon industrial lawyer. I'm sure there are people still at Slater and Gordon, but the firm has left an indelible mark on the legal landscape of Western Australia, and I'm proud to have worked there. I also want to thank Alex Illich at Eureka Lawyers. When I founded Eureka, Alex was the first person I hired. He remains legal practice director and a great friend. The second person I hired also went on to become a legal practice director at Eureka and then become the second person from Eureka to be elected to Parliament. I'm of course talking about the member for Coburn. And finally to my other great mate, the third Eureka lawyer to win pre-selection and hopefully the third elected to this place, thereby maintaining our 100% win rate, Steve Catania, our incredible candidate for Midland. Who knows, maybe one day we will have a former Eureka lawyer as a WA Attorney General. I know that it won't be me. To my friends at Right Side, Michael Magazanik and Chris Prast, Justin Zvatan, Hugo Seymour, John Fiocco, Nick Ellery, Marion Buchanan, Bill King, Justin Edwards, Rob McCabe, my friends at the bar, too numerous to mention except those three who have provided incredible advice and assistance over many years. Tim Hammond SC, Eric Heenan SC and Senator Varun Ghosh. I still have a text that I sent Varun in November last year when he was pre-selected for the Senate, asking if he had any plans for his practice at Francis Burt Chambers. I guess that was the time I knew my time was up. To my staff, top of the list, person known to many people here, Ray Lyle, who was an incredible advisor to me over the time that I've been in Parliament and has been a great friend, great mentor and a great source of support. Lyric Duckett, who I think was just about to offer me his resignation when I beat him to the punch and told him that I was retiring. Jack Eaton, Ben Latham, Rachel Macy, Hope Smith, Dixon Wamakwaya Garbutt, you all demonstrated such incredible loyalty to me and to our community of Mount Lawley, and you did it with kindness, consideration and compassion. I can honestly say that I'll never forget the contribution that each person who worked in my office made to my parliamentary career. Frank Paulino, who's up in the chamber, he's up in the gallery, our outstanding candidate for Mount Lawley. I want to thank Roger Cook, who rang me to check that I was happy with Frank as a candidate. Frank has all the attributes that the Mount Lawley community have come to expect and demand from their Member of Parliament. Firstly, he's local. Secondly, he's extremely hardworking. He has a track record of success. Thirdly, he's committed to the community. I've never heard somebody say the word community as often as Frank Paulino does, and he does it with such passion and such enthusiasm. Finally, I wanted to thank my wife, Tara, and our two awesome sons. Our eldest will start high school next year. He's in the public gallery. Thanks for being here, mate. And it's such a providential time for me to resign as we embark on that journey together as a family. To my wife, Tara, you will never know how much I've relied on you to get me through. You're the best. A recent highlight for me was when I was at a local community event and somebody came up to me and said, "Are you Tara Kelso's husband?" This is a weird job. My father, my grandfather and my big brother are all plasterers. And when you work as a plasterer, when you finish the job, it's done. You don't have to come back and do it again. As a lawyer, thanks to the finality of litigation, when you argue a case, It's done. The judge's decision is final. In politics, it feels like there's always more to do. We provide for provisional damages for compensation for victims of asbestos disease, but we need to tackle the question of compensation for gratuitous services. We need to reform our child sex abuse regime. We need to tackle social division and promote social cohesion. All of these tasks require ongoing work. The time for someone new with energy and enthusiasm to tackle these issues is now. I'm incredibly grateful to everyone here. I'm incredibly grateful to everyone in my community who put their trust in me. I'm incredibly grateful to my friends and my family who supported me all the way through. Being the member for Mount Lawley has been the privilege of a lifetime. Thanks for the opportunity to spend the time here. The arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. Sadly for me, in this place, it bends too slowly and I need to return to a profession where the wait for justice is not so long, because justice delayed is justice denied and justice will not be denied. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Pax. And I know what I said. Thanks, heaps. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Look up, yeah, I CGP from you, mate. Good on you, Sarge. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, heaps. Oh, yeah, right. Premier. Thanks very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Bill. And thanks to you and Kate. Yeah? Yeah. Thanks, Rita. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Robin. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Good on you, mate. Keep up the great fight. Yeah, thanks. Good on you. Yeah, 8,129 votes, same. Thank you. Oh no, right time, right?
To lean to your left this time.
Yeah. Right. Good on you, Jess. Good luck. You'll be great. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, he is.
See ya. Oh, Tilly. Thanks, everyone. Oh, thanks, man. Yeah. Thanks very much.